Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports North Football video, and today I'm going over my Week 6 power rankings for the 2023 NFL season. I apologize for the poor video quality, but I do not have my webcam with me, so my video is a little bit off, but I'll have it with me for future videos. So, with that being said, let's get right into it. First off, we have tragic. We have the Carolina Panthers at 32, we have the Denver Broncos at 31, and the Patriots at 30. The Panthers are 0-5. The Broncos have had a very easy schedule so far this year and are still 1-4. And the Patriots, although they looked pretty decent by week 3, week 4 and 5, they have been by far the worst team in the league, and it's not even close. They've been outscored 72-3 over the last 2 weeks. No team in the league is as bad as these three right now, the only reason why the Patriots are at 30 is because the Broncos and the Panthers have been worse for longer. The Patriots have only been bad for 2 weeks. The Broncos and Panthers have been bad for 5. So, yeah. Moving on, we have the dumpster fire. We have the Commanders at 29, the Bears at 28, the Raiders at 27, the Giants at 26, and the Cardinals at 25. I never had the Commanders over 20 when they were 0-2. I had them okay. I had them as okay, but I really never believed them. Their wins are not impressive. They beat the Broncos and the Cardinals, and they beat the Cardinals week 1 before the Cardinals started showing a semblance of an offense. Since then, they've been demolished in every game that they've played, except for the Eagles game, which was close, but they got demolished by Buffalo. The Eagles game was close, and then this week, they got demolished by the Bears, who were known as the worst team in the league for the entirety of the season up until this week. Washington is 2-3, and right now they look like they shouldn't have won a game so far this season. It looks like their first 2 wins were flukes. The Bears are at 28. They lost to the Broncos in the worst game of the season, the game everybody expected to decide who was going to lose every game of the year. But then this week, the Bears decided to pop off and win a game. And win not only a game, but they scored 40 points. So the Bears jumped up a few spots, up to 28, after 2 good offensive weeks in a row. So if they keep having good offensive weeks, even though their defense isn't great, they'll probably continue to move up a little bit. But their offense does look pretty okay right now. The Raiders are at 27. Their only win is against the Broncos, and they beat them by 1 point. That's a theme here. The Washington Commanders only win against the Broncos. There's a couple other teams whose only win against the Broncos. Not a good look for the Broncos. The Giants and the Cardinals are at 26 and 25. The Giants are 1-4, but honestly, they're not that bad. They've just had the hardest schedule in the league. They've won their only competitive game, which was the Cardinals game. They beat the Cardinals in the only game that they've had a chance to win. Their other games were against Buffalo, Dallas, this week, the 49ers, and then this week, they're against another insanely hard team. All of their matchups have been very tough. They've had basically no chance to win any of their games, except for this week against the Dolphins, except for their game against the Cardinals, and they won that game. That being said, the Cardinals have looked pretty good in some games, but they've also had a pretty difficult schedule. They lost to the Giants, but they did get a win over the Cowboys. And so even though the Giants have the head-to-head matchup, I'm giving it to the Cardinals simply because they have a more impressive win. They beat the Cowboys. Their offenses looked more consistent in a lot of games. And I know the Giants have had a rip of a schedule, and they're playing Buffalo next week, and they really can't do much about that. Arizona has looked slightly better so far this season, but is very close. Moving on to some glimpse of hope, we have the Jets at 24, the Vikings at 23, and the Titans at 22. The Jets won this week against the Broncos. Not much to brag about, but it is their second win of the season. They did win week 1 against the Bills, which was an impressive win, mostly I think because they willed themselves to win after the Aaron Rodgers injury, but since then the Jets have been terrible. This week they had a pretty solid, I believe it was a 2-score win over the Broncos, but I mean the Jets don't look great, but they look better than any team in the previous category. And if they had lost this game, they would have been in the tragic category, but they didn't. They won, and they actually looked okay on offense, which isn't saying much against the Broncos defense, but it's saying something. The Vikings have looked like the best 1-4 team in NFL history. Their 4 losses are to the Buccaneers, the Chargers, the Eagles, and then another very strong team. But they've just been very unlucky with their scheduling. They won their one game they were expected. Oh, this week against Kansas City. They won the one game they were expected to win, was against the Panthers. But other than that, it really just has not been that impressive. They're 23 because they can't beat any of the good teams, but they're good enough to be close to the good teams. 23 is about where I had the Patriots for most of the season until they started doing nothing, so I think it's pretty fair for the Vikings. And at 22, we have the Titans. The Titans are the most bipolar team in the league. They could win 30-0 one week and then lose 30-0 the next week, which is what they've been doing pretty much the whole season. This week they lost to the Colts, so I didn't punish them too much, but they did drop a few spots from last week. Moving on, we have they're still confused. All of these teams have been confused all season, and they're all still very confused. We have the Packers at 21, the Steelers at 20, the Texans at 19, the Falcons at 18, and the Bengals at 17. First of all, I'll preface this by saying, if the Packers beat the Raiders, they're not going to be moving up. And if they lose to the Raiders, they're not going to move them down. They're stuck at 21, unless they score 50 points tomorrow. That being said, the Packers have beaten the Bears and the Saints. The Saints game was a 1-point win. And they really just have not had that hard of a schedule to be 2-2 right now, to be any higher than where they are. If they were 3-1 right now, then they'd probably be in the next tier, but they really just haven't had that difficult of a schedule, and they really haven't impressed me very much. The Steelers are at 20, they're 3-2. They're almost more bipolar than the Titans. They have had an extremely weird season. They beat the Ravens this week. And they beat the Browns somehow, even though Deshaun Watson was out for that, or was out for parts of that game. Or Nick Chubb went out during that game. I don't know. There were some injuries on the Browns during that game. They've had a very odd season so far. I think that they should be higher than this, but their offense just isn't good enough for me to put them higher than 20. They need to have more offensive performance than this to be higher right now. Also, they lost 30-6 to Houston last week. If they hadn't lost 30-6, then I'd have them higher than Houston. But they lost 30-6, which makes it very hard to put them above the Texans. That being said, the Falcons are at 18 because they've beaten both the Texans and the Packers. Basically, for this tier, I had no idea where to put any of these teams. I know that these are the 5 teams that I think are closest to being just below mid, but I don't know how to rank any of them, so I basically just went off matchups. The Falcons have beaten both the Texans and the Packers, so they're at 18. And then the Bengals are at 17. The Bengals and Packers haven't played any of these teams, but the Bengals are on an upswing, and the Packers are on a downswing. The Packers started off strong. They've gotten a little bit worse. The Bengals started off very poorly, and they've looked more like themselves the last 3 or 4 weeks. Moving on, we have This Is Interesting. We have the Browns at 16, the Saints at 15, the Rams at 14, the Ravens at 13, and the Chargers at 12. The Chargers will never not be 12. They had a bye week this week. They're still 12. They're always going to be 12. The Browns also had a bye week this week, and Deshaun Watson is, to my knowledge, still injured. Once he comes back and plays the game, then I will re-rank the Browns, but until he comes back and plays a game, the Browns are going to be at 16 after losing 27-3 to the Titans. As for the Saints, the Rams, and the Ravens, the Saints demolished the Patriots this week 34-0. There's an argument that they should be higher than 15, but they really haven't beaten any impressive teams. They really haven't had any impressive games other than this one. The Saints have had the most mediocre season ever outside of this game, and this game is an identical game to what happened to the Patriots last week. So if that's a trend for the Patriots, then I don't put much stock into it for the Saints. Their other wins were against the Titans week 1, where they won by 1 point, and against, I don't remember their other win, but it wasn't a very impressive win. They've been very above average this season, very slightly above average, and their defense is very strong, but their offense does need more improvement. As for the Rams and the Ravens, the Rams are 2-3. but I have them higher than the Saints just because they've had a harder schedule, and they've done very well with it. They've performed very well in all of their games, except for this game against the Eagles this week, and 2 of their losses are to the Eagles and the Niners, and their other losses to Seattle. If the Saints have had the Rams schedule, they would either be 2-3 or they'd be 1-4. So I think that putting the Rams above the Saints is pretty fair. And then for the Ravens, they're 3-2. They lost this week to the Steelers, 17-10. Shocking loss from them. Their offense really has not been very impressive. And they also lost to the Colts. So they really haven't had the hardest schedule in the world. And 2 of their losses have been very unimpressive. So they're at 13 for right now. They're kind of kicked out of the top 10 for a week. They'll probably be back in the top 10 next week. But they get a week off after losing to the Steelers. Next up, we have the strong contenders. We have the Colts at 11. We have the Buccaneers at 10. We have the Jaguars at 9. And we have the Seahawks at 8. I was hoping Tampa would have a game this week because they are the team that I'm most questionable about on where I have them ranked. I have them at 10. I had them at 10 last week. They stayed at 10 because they're on a bye. But they're very questionable right now. Baker Mayfield is looking good. The defense is looking decent. They've played well against good teams. I just really don't trust their team. But so far, they've played like a top 10 team. So I'm going to keep them at 10 until they stop playing like a top 10 team. The Colts are at 11. The Colts are at 3-2. And they have a couple of impressive wins under their belt. They've beaten the Ravens. And then this week, they beat Tennessee. And overall, they beat Houston. Houston isn't the best team in the world, but they've been fairly strong. So they don't have the worst team in the world, and their losses are to good teams. They lost to the Rams in overtime, and they lost to Jacksonville week 1 before their offense started playing well. The Colts have been a top 10 team over the last 4 weeks. The Jacksonville loss is holding them back a little bit, but they've been a very strong team. And if they'd beaten the Rams last week, then they'd probably be at number 8 right now. 9-8, we have the Seahawks and the Jaguars. The Seahawks' only loss was week 1 to the Rams. Since then, they've been just a dominant team. And then the Jaguars have been bouncing all the way up and down the power rankings. I think that they were down as low as 17 at one point in time. But the last couple of weeks, they've improved. And this week, they beat Buffalo 25-20. It was an impressive game against Buffalo. They capitalized on the opportunities that they needed to, and they played a very strong game overall. Moving on, we have Elite Junior. We have the Lions, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys. The Cowboys lost this week to the Niners. The Cowboys have been a very interesting team this season. They haven't beaten anybody impressive. They haven't won any impressive games. But every game that they've won has been a blowout. They demolished the Patriots, they demolished the Giants, and they demolished the Jets. But demolishing bad teams doesn't make you a good team necessarily. And they lost to the Cardinals, which is the best team that they've faced outside of those 3. And then they lost this week to the Niners. I almost put them at 7. I really did. But then I thought about it and realized that the Dolphins and the Lions also haven't beaten anybody impressive. The Lions beat Kansas City week 1, but the Chiefs didn't have Travis Kelce and they didn't have Chris Jones. And that was the Chiefs' only loss of the season because they got those 2 guys back. And then Miami obviously beat the Broncos 70-0, but it's the Broncos, and they haven't won any impressive games. They beat the Patriots, they beat the Chargers, which is the most impressive game out of any of these teams on any slate and any comparison. But other than that, none of these teams have beaten anybody impressive, and the Dolphins lost to the Bills 48-20 in their one chance to beat a good team. So the Dolphins and the Cowboys have both failed when they had a chance to beat a good team. And then the Lions lost to the Seahawks. So, yeah, all these teams are like hovering on the border of being elite, but none of them have beaten a good team yet, except for the Dolphins who beat the Chargers. So the Dolphins have an argument for number 5, but it's all up in the air. And last but certainly not least, we have the NFL's elite. We have the 49ers at 1, we have the Eagles at 2, we have the Chiefs at 3, and we have the Bills at 4. The Chiefs were at 5 last week because they really have not impressed me to Kansas City standards so far, but they're still winning their games, and they're 4-1. So they passed up Buffalo this week. Buffalo dropped down to number 4 after losing to the Jaguars. I considered putting Buffalo at 5 or 6 this week after their loss, and then I considered it more, and I realized that they have beaten a good team. They beat Miami. And their only losses were a 5-point loss to Jacksonville, who's a solid team, and a Week 1 loss to the Jets, which I think most people consider a fluke game. The Jets played a very strong game after the loss of Aaron Rodgers. The Bills just didn't play very well. So since Week 1, they've been a very strong team. This was a tough week against Jacksonville, but the Bills have been dominant in all of their other games. Kansas City played a very strong game this week. I thought that the Vikings had a chance of winning this week, but then Justin Jefferson went out with injury. If Justin Jefferson hadn't gone out with injury, then I think that they could have had a chance to win. I was a little surprised at how much faith I had in the Vikings to win this game. That's how much Kansas City's not been themselves this season. But the fact of the matter is that they're still 4-1, and that once they become themselves, they're going to be better than that. So it's kind of wild. The Eagles had a very strong game against the Rams this week. I was tempted to put them at number 1, but obviously the 49ers played Dallas. So like, even if the Eagles have a 50-0 game against the Rams, the 49ers beating Dallas is still going to be a slightly more impressive game. And then so the 49ers and the Eagles are still the 2 undefeated teams in the league. The 49ers have not lost a game since Brock Purdy became the quarterback, that he's played more than 25% of the snaps. Eagles and Niners are very clearly the 2 best teams in the league, and the Niners have just been a little bit slightly more dominant. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, sorry for the camera quality issue, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Very interesting season of football so far. A lot of teams that I didn't think would be doing very well are doing very good. And there's a lot of teams that I expected to be okay that are not. So we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.